We're back with part 3 of this week's reading of the Messianic Jewish Family Bible Tree of Life version. And we're going to be doing chapter 23, Keep and Do Torah. Now it came about after many days when Adonai had given rest to Israel from all their enemies around them, and Joshua was old and advanced in years, that Joshua summoned all Israel, their elders, their heads, and their judges, and their officials, and said to them, I have grown old and am advanced in years. Now you have seen all that Adonai your God has done to all these nations because of you. For it was Adonai your God who was fighting for you. Behold, I have allotted to you as an inheritance according to your tribes these nations that remain, along with all the nations that I have cut off from the Jordan to the great sea, towards the setting of the sun. So Adonai your God, he himself, will thrust them out before you and drive them out before you. So you will possess the land just as Adonai your God spoke to you. Be very resolute to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the Torah of Moses, so that you may not turn aside from it to the right or to the left, and not intermingle with these nations who are still remaining among you. Do not mention the names of their gods, or swear by them, or worship them, or bow down to them, but cling to Adonai your God, as you have done to this day. For Adonai has driven out from before you great and mighty nations. As for you, no one remains standing before you to this day. One of you can put 1,000 to flight. For Adonai your God, he himself is fighting for you, just as he said to you. For your own sake, therefore, be most mindful to love Adonai your God. For if you ever go back and cling to the remnant of these nations that are still remaining among you, and intermarry with them, and you associate with them, and they with you, know for certain that Adonai your God will no longer drive these nations out from before you. Instead, they will become a snare and a trap for you, a scourge in your sides, and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from this good land which Adonai your God has given you. Now today I'm about to go the way of all the earth. You will know with all your heart and with all your soul that not one word of the good things which Adonai your God spoke concerning you has failed to happen. All of them have come to pass for you. Not one word failed. Now it will be that, just as all the good things with which Adonai your God has spoken to you have come upon you, so all the evil things will Adonai bring upon you, until he has wiped you off this good land which Adonai your God has given you. When you transgress the covenant with Adonai your God, which he commanded you, and go and worship other gods, and bow down to them, then will the anger of Adonai burn against you, and you will perish quickly off this good land which he has given you. And that's the end of chapter 24. And that's really a lesson also for us today. I mean, he does not want us worshiping other gods and clinging to other gods. Um, and I'm going to recap all this a little bit later. Chapter 24, whom will you worship? And again, this is going to be addressed. Then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel to Shechem, and summoned Israel's elders, heads, judges, and officials. So they presented themselves before God. Then Joshua said to all the people, Thus says Adonai, God of Israel, from ancient times your fathers, Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, lived beyond the river and worshipped other gods. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led them through the entire land of Canaan, and multiplied his offspring. I gave him Isaac. Then to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. To Esau I gave Mount Seir to possess it as his own, but Jacob and his children went down to Egypt. So I went, so I sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt with what I did in its midst. And afterward I brought you out. I brought your fathers out of Egypt. When you came to the sea, the Egyptians pursued your fathers to the Sea of Reeds with chariots and horsemen. But when they cried out to Adonai, he put darkness between you and the Egyptians. Then he brought the sea upon them, and it covered them. And your eyes saw what I did to the Egyptians. Then you stayed in the wilderness for a long time. Then I brought you to the land of the Amorites, who were living beyond the Jordan. Though they fought against you, I gave them into your hand, and you possessed their land when I destroyed them from before you. Then Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, rose and fought against Israel. He even sent and called for Balaam, son of Beor, to curse you, but I refused to listen to Balaam. Instead, he had to keep blessing you. Thus I delivered you from his hand. Then you crossed over the Jordan and came to Jericho. But the men of Jericho fought against you, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. But I delivered them into your hand. Then I sent the hornet before you, and it drove them out before you, the two kings of the Amorites, not by your sword or your bow. I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities that you had not built, and you have not settled in them. I'm sorry, and you have settled in them. Vineyards and olive groves that you had not planted, that you were eating. Now therefore fear Adonai and worship him in sincerity and in truth. Get rid of the gods that your fathers had worshipped beyond the river and in Egypt, and worship Adonai. If it seems bad to you to worship Adonai, then choose for yourself today whom you will serve, whether the gods that your fathers worshipped that were beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will worship Adonai. And that's that famous verse. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And in the Messianic translation, it's, but as for me and my household, we will worship Adonai. Then the people answered and said, far be it from us that we should forsake Adonai to worship other gods. For it was Adonai, our God, who brought us and our fathers up from the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage, and who did those great signs in our sight and preserved us all along the way that we traveled and among all the peoples through whose midst we passed. It was Adonai who drove out from before us all the peoples, the Amorites that lived in the land. Therefore, we also will worship Adonai, for he is our God. But Joshua said to the people, you will not be able to worship Adonai, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not pardon your transgressions and your sins if you forsake Adonai and worship foreign gods. Then he will turn and do you harm and consume you after he has done good to you. But the people said to Joshua, no, for we will worship Adonai. So Joshua said to the people, you are witnesses to yourself that you have chosen for yourself Adonai to worship him. We are witnesses, they responded. Now therefore get rid of the foreign gods that are in your midst, and incline your hearts to Adonai, God of Israel. And the people said to Joshua, we will worship none but Adonai our God, and we will obey none but his voice. So Joshua cut a covenant with the people that day and set for them a statute and an ordinance in Shechem. Then Joshua wrote these words in the scroll of the Torah of God. Also he took a great stone and set it up under the oak that was by the sanctuary of Adonai. Joshua said to all the people, behold, this stone will be a witness to us, for it has heard all the words of Adonai, which he has spoken to us. So it will be a witness to you, lest you deny your God. Joshua then dismissed the people, each to his own inheritance, Now it came to pass after these things that Joshua son of Nun, the servant of Adonai, died at the age of 110 years. So they buried him in the territory of his own portion in Timnath Serah, which is in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. Israel worshipped Adonai all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, and had known all the work of Adonai that he had done for Israel. Joseph's bones, which Bani Israel had brought up from Egypt, they buried in Shechem, in the parcel of ground that Jacob had bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of silver. It became the inheritance of the children of Joseph. Then Eleazar son of Aaron died, and they buried him in Gibeah, which had been given to Phinehas his son, in the hill country of Ephraim. So Joshua, lived for 110 years, and Joshua's bones had been carried all this time, and they had finally buried his bones in Shechem. And again, the famous line, "But as for me and my household, who will worship Adonai," is in this section that we read. So that would be chapter 24, verse 15. So I just want to mention here, as a little tidbit here, in chapter 20 of Joshua, it mentions the city of refuge. And this was really important because this was addressing people that actually, they may have accidentally killed somebody, like maybe something flew off of a tool they were working on with and might have hit somebody in the head and bam, knocked them out and they were dead. Um, you never know. But these city of refuge were actually set in the case where it was not a premeditated murder type of thing, and so that an avenger, like a family member or something, wouldn't come after them and murder them before they had a chance to have a fair trial. So that's what this was all set. They were set apart so that they could have a place that they could be safe and they couldn't get near them. Now, of course, premeditated murder, I mean, they would be put to death. That was very clear in Exodus 20, with the Ten Commandments saying, "Thou shalt not kill." So again, the word murdering means to kill someone unlawfully with premeditation. The word killing means an act causing death, especially deliberately. And while it appears these words are the same, they can be different. To murder means with intention. To kill can be an act of causing death that may not be intentional. And that had to be determined. It could be accidental or unintentional. In modern day, this could be when there's like I was saying, when there's an accident of some sort. And in our time, it could be a car accident when someone dies, and that is certainly unintentional. Another example could be accidental death due to equipment malfunction, and also in self-defense. These are three examples of how it might look in our world today. So in Joshua chapter 20, God provided Israel with cities of refuge, and there were 6 cities. 3 were located on the east side of the Jordan, and 3 located on the west of the river. And the purpose of these cities was to provide refuge for those who committed crimes of ignorance, mistakes, or unintentional wrongs to others, who would go to until they had a fair trial to prove their innocence or their guilt. And Yeshua is our city of refuge. So, again, as you could tell when we were reading chapter 24, when Joshua died, I mean, the book continued, and the person that initially continued that book was Eleazar, the priest, the high priest. And then, of course, then it says that Eleazar died, so Phinehas took over and completed the book of Joshua. And as we see in these concluding chapters, God is not slack on his promises. And he promised the land to Bnei Israel, and they had to do a certain thing that God commanded them to do in order to make that also happen. But God was on their side, and as long as they followed what God wanted them to do, he delivered their enemies right to their hands, and actually also delivered the land. So we open up chapter 17 with the division of the land of to Manasseh, and that is discussed there in that chapter. And Manasseh wanted a larger portion, and that was also addressed in that chapter. So then we move on, actually, to more divisions of the land. There were 7 divisions that took place from the other tribes. So that went on to discuss that. And I'm going to fast forward. The next thing is chapter 20. We discussed the 6 cities of refuge in a little bit more detail. Chapter 21, the cities for the Levites, were discussed. Chapter 22, Joshua gave his blessing, and the eastern tribes were released then to be able to return home. Joshua called the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh and reminded them of their covenant and to keep the Ten Commandments and all of that as well. Like I said, I'm just recapping this because we read everything and all the land and everything. I'm not going to read all of that again. This is just a recap. So Joshua was sending the tribe of Reuben, Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh back to the east side of the Jordan, because now the children of Israel were all settled in their land. And that was the agreement that they had made, and that they would stay with their brethren until everyone was settled in the land. And now that that had happened, Joshua was giving his blessing that they could return. So when they returned, they had built a great altar, and as we read, the word got back to the rest of the tribes, and they heard about this, and they were ready to go to war with the tribes on the east side of the Jordan, Reuben, Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh. They were going to wipe them out because they really thought that they built an altar to worship on, and instead of going to the altar they were supposed to as one big nation together. And so they were going after them because they just figured, okay, they're just going against what God said, and it's going to bring God's wrath on us, and we're not going to have this. We went, the other generations went through all this, and that's not happening. So what they found out was that wasn't why they built the altar. It was for a memorial and for a reminder to the other side that they did have a part in Adonai, and that they were all one as far as a nation of Bnei Israel, of the children of Israel, that were blessed, and they were part of Adonai as well. Not to sacrifice, but this was to serve as a reminder. And it was to commemorate their crossing the Jordan and the land God gave them. And so when Phinehas heard that, he was pleased, and so were the representatives of each tribe that were sent along with Phinehas. So they handled the situation, and they were pleased with their brothers on the east side of the Jordan, that they were not going against Adonai's commands, and this was not a bad thing that they did. So if it had not been for that, Phinehas actually was a pretty mighty warrior. And if you remember way back when we read in the Torah, when there was problems in the camp, and um, there was a man and a woman that actually came into the camp. They weren't supposed to be mixing with the Gentiles, that were practicing pagan worship, but one couple actually flaunted, being together in front of the camp, and Phineas went in and actually killed them both. So he was not one that was going to play games. So he took over the priesthood, um, the high priest command, after Eleazar passed away. So he was right there to deal with it, because he wasn't going to have any of that. Um, so, but they worked that out. And in chapter 23, the people assembled for Joshua to address them, and he gave a powerful charge in his farewell address to the people, and he really let them know everything that the Lord had done for them. Um, how he also addressed back bef- before, actually going all the way back to the original father Abraham, who was taken out of his original land, um, where there was idolatry, that was going on, but how he built them into a great nation, how they ended up in Egypt, and they came out of Egypt, and that they needed to follow everything, and the laws of Moses that were brought to them, and in following everything they would be blessed. But if they didn't follow, that the anger, of Adonai would be kindled against them. And I need to pause this. Woo! I didn't realize I was already at 22 minutes. So I'm going to pause this and come back for another part.